Jeffrey Edward Epstein entered the world on January 20th, 1953, in the borough of Brooklyn, New York, 5 from the private islands, billionaires, and scandal that would later define his name. His beginnings were modest and unremarkable, rooted in the rhythms of working-class life. He was born into a Jewish family that valued education, stability, and hard work. His father, Seymour Epstein, worked as a groundskeeper and janitor for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, a job that demanded long hours and steady reliability rather than glamour. His mother, Paula Epstein, worked as a school secretary. Together, they built a life centered on practicality and responsibility, raising Jeffrey and his younger brother Mark in a small apartment in the Seagate neighborhood of Brooklyn. Seagate was a curious place to grow up. Though it was technically part of Brooklyn, it was a gated community surrounded by fences and guarded entrances. For a child, this environment could feel both protected and isolated at the same time. On one hand, there was a sense of safety and familiarity. On the other, the gates created a physical reminder that the outside world was larger, wealthier, and more complicated. For Jeffrey, this contrast may have quietly shaped the way he viewed status and success. From an early age, he was living in a place that physically separated insiders from outsiders, privilege from ordinary life. Whether he understood it at the time or not, the concept of access would become a recurring theme throughout his life. Family life in the Epstein household was stable and conventional. There were no signs of the notoriety that would follow him decades later. Friends and neighbors from those early years often described the family as quiet and unassuming. Jeffrey's parents were focused on providing opportunities for their sons, emphasizing schoolwork and discipline. Jeffrey grew up alongside his younger brother Mark, who would later go on to build a career in real estate. The brothers shared the same small living space and the same upbringing, but people who knew them often said Jeffrey seemed different, more inwardly focused, more intent on carving his own path. As a child, Jeffrey was considered bright and academically capable. Teachers noticed early that he had natural aptitude for mathematics and science. Numbers came easily to him, and he displayed a curiosity that suggested a mind eager to understand complex ideas. Some classmates remembered him as quiet but observant, someone who preferred thinking and analyzing rather than socializing. Others described him as socially awkward, not unfriendly but not particularly outgoing either. He seemed to watch people carefully, as if trying to understand how they worked. He attended public school 188 and later Mark Twain Junior High School, where his academic performance continued to stand out. By the time he reached adolescence, he had already begun to develop a reputation for intelligence. His teachers recognized his potential and encouraged him to pursue advanced studies. For a boy growing up in a modest Brooklyn apartment, education represented a pathway to something bigger. It was a door that might open to a different world. Eventually, Epstein enrolled at the Boyd School, a private preparatory institution in Brooklyn. Attending a private school marked a shift in his environment. He was suddenly surrounded by students from families with greater financial means and social connections. This exposure to a more affluent social circle may have been one of the earliest glimpses he had into the world of privilege. He was no longer just a janitor's son from a small apartment. He was a student among peers whose families lived very different lives. During these teenage years, Epstein's personality continued to take shape. Those who encountered him often described a mixture of intelligence and ambition. He was not necessarily the most popular student, but he was aware of the importance of positioning himself in environments that offered opportunity. He understood that education could be a stepping stone, a way to move beyond the limitations of his upbringing. When it came time for college, Epstein enrolled at Cooper Union, a highly respected institution in New York City known for its rigorous programs in science and engineering. Attending Cooper Union was an achievement in itself, as admission was competitive and required strong academic performance. He later transferred to New York University, continuing his studies in mathematics and physics. Yet despite his academic promise, Epstein never completed a college degree. The reasons for this decision remain somewhat unclear. Some accounts suggest he left due to financial pressures, while others indicate he simply chose to pursue opportunities outside academia. Leaving college without a degree might have seemed like a setback for many, but Epstein did not appear deterred. Instead, he began searching for ways to move forward in the professional world. This period marked the beginning of a pattern that would define much of his life. a willingness to move quickly from one environment to another, using intelligence and connections to open doors that might otherwise have remained closed. His first significant professional opportunity came in an unexpected way. Epstein secured a job as a teacher at the Dalton School, an elite private school in Manhattan known for educating the children of wealthy and influential families. The position was remarkable because Epstein did not hold a college degree, something typically required for such roles. Yet he managed to convince the school that his knowledge of mathematics and physics made him qualified to teach. This moment was pivotal. For the first time, Epstein found himself immersed in a world far removed from his Brooklyn upbringing. At Dalton, he was surrounded by students whose parents were financiers, executives, and social elites. The school was more than just a workplace. It was a gateway into a network of wealth and influence. Teaching there allowed him to observe and interact with families who moved in circles he had never previously accessed. People who knew him during this period often described him as charismatic and confident, especially in academic settings. He was capable of explaining complex ideas in a way that impressed both students and colleagues. He also seemed comfortable navigating conversations with parents and administrators, gradually building relationships that would later prove significant. Looking back, Epstein's childhood and early years appear as the quiet foundation of a much larger story. He began life in a modest apartment in a gated Brooklyn community, raised by hardworking parents who valued education and stability. He showed early intelligence and ambition, moving steadily through school and into environments that exposed him to wealth and opportunity. By the time he left his teaching position and began transitioning into finance, he had already crossed a social boundary that many people spend their entire lives trying to reach. The boy who once lived behind the gates of Seagate was now stepping into a world of elite connections and limitless possibility. At this stage, the future still seemed open and undefined. The darker chapters of his life had not yet unfolded, but the path he was beginning to walk would eventually lead him far beyond the modest beginnings of his childhood, into a life that would capture global attention for reasons no one could have predicted. Jeffrey Epstein's transition from a modest upbringing into the corridors of privilege truly began during his early adulthood, a period marked by ambition, calculated risks, and an unusual ability to insert himself into environments that seemed far beyond his formal qualifications. By the time he left college without earning a degree, he faced a crossroads that could have led to uncertainty or limitation. Instead, he managed to find an entry point into a world that would change the trajectory of his life forever. His first major opportunity came when he secured a teaching position at the Dalton School in Manhattan, one of the most prestigious private schools in New York City. The Dalton School was known for educating the children of wealthy and influential families, including executives, financiers, and celebrities. The job itself was remarkable, not just because of the school's reputation, but because Epstein had no college degree. At a time when academic credentials were typically essential, he was able to persuade the school that his knowledge of mathematics and physics made him capable of teaching at an advanced level. Walking into the Dalton School each day must have felt like stepping into a completely different universe from the Brooklyn neighborhood where he had grown up. The students he taught lived lives of privilege and access, surrounded by opportunities that most people could only imagine. The parents of these students were deeply connected to the world of finance, business, and high society. For Epstein, the classroom was more than a workplace. It was a vantage point from which he could observe the habits, expectations, and social structures of the wealthy. During his time at Dalton, Epstein developed a reputation for being intelligent, confident, and capable of engaging students in complex subjects. Mathematics and physics were disciplines that demanded clarity and logical thinking, and he appeared comfortable guiding students through difficult material. More importantly, he began forming relationships beyond the classroom. He interacted with parents, administrators, and colleagues who operated in circles far removed from the life he had known growing up. This period marked the beginning of Epstein's exposure to powerful networks. Teaching the children of wealthy families meant being invited into conversations and environments that were not typically accessible to someone from his background. He learned how the wealthy spoke, how they socialized, and how they conducted business. He observed the subtle dynamics of influence and connection. Over time, these experiences began to shape his ambitions. After several years at Dalton, Epstein made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He left the world of education and set his sights on finance. The move was bold and unconventional, particularly given his lack of a formal degree in economics or business. Yet he managed to secure a position at Bear Stearns, a prominent investment bank. The story of how he obtained the job has been recounted in various ways, but most accounts agree that Epstein's connections and ability to present himself confidently played a crucial role. At Bear Stearns, Epstein entered a highly competitive environment where success depended on understanding markets, managing risk, and cultivating relationships with clients. The financial world of the late 1970s and early 1980s was fast-paced and demanding, rewarding those who could think quickly and navigate complex transactions. Epstein began working as a junior assistant but quickly advanced within the company. He eventually became involved in advising wealthy clients, helping them manage their financial affairs. This role provided him with valuable experience and insight. He learned how wealth was structured, how investments were managed, and how financial institutions interacted with high-net-worth individuals. He also began building relationships with clients who possessed extraordinary resources and influence. The more he learned, the more he seemed to recognize that connections could be as valuable as credentials. Despite his progress at Bear Stearns, Epstein did not remain there indefinitely. By the early 1980s, he left the firm and began pursuing opportunities on his own. This decision marked the beginning of his transformation from employee to entrepreneur. He founded his own financial consulting firm, presenting himself as someone who specialized in managing the finances of extremely wealthy individuals. The exact details of his work during this period have often been described as opaque. Epstein was known for maintaining a high level of privacy regarding his clients and business practices. What is clear is that he began cultivating a reputation as a financial advisor who could handle complex and sensitive matters. He positioned himself as someone capable of navigating the unique challenges faced by the ultra-wealthy. His services reportedly included tax planning, wealth management, and strategic financial advice. Over time, he accumulated clients who trusted him with substantial portions of their fortunes. This phase of his life was defined by growth and transformation. Epstein was no longer the teacher from Brooklyn who had taken an unconventional path into finance. He was becoming a figure associated with wealth and influence. He began moving in elite social circles, attending gatherings where business and social life blended seamlessly. His ability to form connections and maintain relationships became one of his defining characteristics. As his career progressed, Epstein developed a lifestyle that reflected his rising status. He began acquiring properties and spending time in environments that signaled success and exclusivity. His professional identity became closely tied to his ability to navigate the world of the wealthy. He was seen as someone who understood the needs of powerful clients and could operate discreetly on their behalf. The transition from education to finance was not merely a career change. It was a transformation of identity. Epstein had crossed a social boundary that separated his childhood environment from the elite circles he now inhabited. The skills he had developed along the way, confidence, adaptability, and an ability to connect with influential individuals, played a central role in this shift. By the time the 1980s drew to a close, Epstein had established himself as a financial consultant with a network of affluent clients. He had moved far beyond the modest beginnings of his youth. The world he now occupied was one of private meetings, exclusive events, and financial transactions involving enormous sums of money. The trajectory of his life seemed to be moving steadily upward, driven by ambition and opportunity. Yet even as his professional success grew, there remained an air of mystery surrounding the details of his wake. Unlike many financiers who built public reputations through visible achievements, Epstein maintained a relatively low public profile. He was known within certain circles, but he did not seek widespread recognition. This combination of visibility and secrecy would become a recurring theme in his life. Chapter 2 of Jeffrey Epstein's story is one of ambition, transformation, and entry into a world defined by wealth and influence. It is the story of how a former teacher leveraged intelligence and connections to establish himself in finance, building relationships that would shape the rest of his life. The foundations laid during this period would eventually lead him deeper into the world of high society, setting the stage for the chapters that followed. As the years passed and Jeffrey Epstein's presence in the world of finance became more established, his life began to transform into something far more extravagant and mysterious. The quiet financial consultant who had once worked behind the scenes was gradually stepping into a lifestyle defined by wealth, luxury, and access to powerful social circles. This period marked the height of his rise into high society, where influence often mattered as much as money, and relationships could open doors that seemed unreachable to most people. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Epstein had built a reputation as a financial advisor who catered to the ultra-wealthy. Unlike many financiers who sought publicity and recognition, he remained relatively private about his business dealings. His company operated in a way that appeared deliberately discreet, and he often emphasized confidentiality as one of his most valuable services. For the clients he worked with, privacy was not simply a preference, it was a necessity. This aura of secrecy made Epstein intriguing to those who encountered him. People knew he was wealthy, yet few could clearly explain exactly how he had accumulated his fortune. With growing wealth came a transformation in lifestyle. Epstein began acquiring properties in some of the most prestigious locations in the world. He owned residences in Manhattan, Palm Beach, New Mexico, Paris, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Each property reflected opulence and exclusivity, serving as both private retreats and social venues. Among the most famous was his mansion in Manhattan, a massive townhouse located on the Upper East Side. The property was known for its grand design, elaborate decor, and unusual features that sparked curiosity and speculation. Epstein's life became increasingly intertwined with high society. He attended elite gatherings, charity events, and private parties where the guest lists included celebrities, politicians, academics, and business leaders. He cultivated relationships with people from a wide range of fields, from entertainment and technology to politics and royalty. Photographs from the era show him appearing alongside well-known figures, reinforcing the impression that he had become deeply embedded in the world of the global elite. For many observers, Epstein seemed to embody the image of a self-made financier who had mastered the art of networking. He had moved far beyond his modest Brooklyn beginnings, establishing himself as someone who could navigate the most exclusive social circles with ease. His ability to connect with powerful individuals became one of his defining traits. He was often described as charming and confident, someone who could engage in conversations on a variety of subjects and present himself as knowledgeable and worldly. Travel became a central part of his lifestyle. Epstein frequently moved between his properties, hosting guests and attending events in different cities and countries. He owned private aircraft that allowed him to travel on his own schedule, further reinforcing his image as a man of immense resources. For those who encountered him, his life appeared glamorous and enviable, filled with luxury and access. Yet beneath the surface of this glamorous existence, questions about the source of his wealth persisted. Unlike many financiers whose success was tied to well-known companies or public investments, Epstein's business activities remained difficult to define. He described himself as a financial advisor and wealth manager, but the details of his work were rarely discussed publicly. This lack of transparency contributed to an aura of mystery that surrounded him. Some people saw this mystery as a sign of exclusivity. In the world of high finance, discretion can be a valuable asset. Clients who valued privacy might prefer an advisor who kept a low profile and avoided public scrutiny. Others, however, found the secrecy puzzling. They wondered how one individual could accumulate such vast wealth without a clearly visible track record of major deals or public ventures. Despite these questions, Epstein continued to expand his network and maintain his position in elite circles. He hosted gatherings at his homes, inviting guests from various industries to mingle and exchange ideas. These events often blended business and social life, creating an environment where relationships could flourish. Being invited to one of his gatherings became a sign of status, an indication that one had access to an exclusive social world. During this period, Epstein also became associated with philanthropic and academic initiatives. He donated to universities and research institutions, particularly those focused on science and technology. By supporting academic projects and research programs, he positioned himself as someone interested in intellectual advancement and innovation. These contributions further enhanced his public image, presenting him as a benefactor who supported education and scientific progress. As his influence grew, Epstein became increasingly comfortable moving between different worlds. He could attend a charity gala one evening, meet with financial clients the next day, and host a private gathering later in the week. His life seemed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, blending business, social life, and philanthropy into a single narrative of success. Observers often noted how effectively he cultivated relationships. He maintained connections with people who held power and influence, ensuring that his network remained strong and diverse. This ability to maintain relationships across different fields gave him a unique position in high society. He was not defined by a single professional role but by the breadth of his connections. Despite the outward image of success and influence, the mystery surrounding his finances and personal life never fully disappeared. Questions lingered about how he managed his clients' wealth, what services he provided, and how he sustained such an extravagant lifestyle. Yet for many years, these questions remained largely confined to private conversations and speculation. The 1990s and early 2000s represented the peak of Epstein's rise into high society. His properties, travel, and social connections painted the picture of a man who had achieved extraordinary success. He had transformed himself from a teacher in Manhattan into a figure who moved among the world's most powerful individuals. His life appeared to be a testament to ambition and opportunity, a story of how intelligence and connections could open doors to unimaginable wealth and influence. At the same time, this period laid the groundwork for the scrutiny that would later define his legacy. The combination of wealth, secrecy, and powerful connections created a narrative that was both fascinating and unsettling. For years, Epstein remained a figure who intrigued those who encountered him, a man whose life seemed to exist behind a curtain of privacy and exclusivity. Chapter 3 of his story captures this moment in time when his rise appeared complete. He had achieved the lifestyle he once could only have observed from a distance. The gates that once symbolized separation during his childhood now seemed to stand open before him. He had entered the world of the elite and made it his home. Yet beneath the surface of this success, forces were already beginning to gather that would eventually bring his world into the spotlight in ways no one could have predicted. As Jeffrey Epstein's life of wealth and influence continued into the late 1990s and early 2000s, a darker reality began to emerge beneath the surface of his carefully constructed public image. The same secrecy and privacy that had helped him cultivate relationships and maintain his status in elite social circles would later play a role in hiding activities that would eventually shock the world. For years, rumors and whispers circulated quietly, far from the headlines and public scrutiny that would later follow. The first serious signs of trouble began to surface in the early 2000s. Reports started to emerge from young women who alleged that Epstein had engaged in inappropriate and abusive behavior involving minors. At first, these allegations did not receive widespread attention. Epstein's wealth, connections, and reputation seemed to create a barrier that kept the accusations from gaining traction. In many ways, this period illustrated how power and influence can shape the course of investigations and public perception. In 2005, the situation reached a turning point when a parent in Palm Beach, Florida, reported to police that her teenage daughter had been abused by Epstein. This report initiated an investigation that would uncover a pattern of allegations involving multiple victims. As investigators began interviewing young women, a disturbing picture started to form. Several individuals described similar experiences, alleging that they had been recruited to visit Epstein's home and were then subjected to sexual abuse. The investigation revealed a network of recruitment in which young women were allegedly encouraged to bring other girls to Epstein's residences. This pattern of behavior became a central part of the case against him. As more individuals came forward, the scale of the allegations grew, transforming what might have been dismissed as an isolated accusation into a broader and more serious investigation. Despite the seriousness of the allegations, the legal proceedings that followed became highly controversial. In 2008, Epstein reached a plea agreement with federal prosecutors. The deal allowed him to plead guilty to lesser charges and serve a significantly reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 13 months in a county jail, but the terms of his incarceration included a work release program that allowed him to leave the facility during the day and return at night. This arrangement drew intense criticism from the public and legal experts, who questioned how such a lenient outcome had been reached given the severity of the accusations. The plea deal became one of the most debated aspects of Epstein's case. Critics argued that it reflected the influence of wealth and powerful connections, raising questions about fairness and accountability in the justice system. For many observers, The outcome reinforced the perception that Epstein's social status had shielded him from facing the full consequences of the allegations against him. Following his release from jail, Epstein returned to a lifestyle that appeared outwardly unchanged. He continued to spend time at his properties and maintain relationships with individuals in high society. However, the shadow of the investigation remained. His name had become associated with scandal, and the allegations against him had not disappeared. Instead, they lingered in the background, resurfacing periodically in civil lawsuits and media reports. Over the years that followed, additional individuals came forward with accusations of abuse. Some filed civil lawsuits seeking damages, while others spoke publicly about their experiences. These accounts kept the story alive, gradually increasing public awareness of the case. The narrative surrounding Epstein began to shift from quiet controversy to growing public concern. As the years passed, journalists and investigators continued to examine the details of the original plea deal. Questions emerged about how the agreement had been negotiated and whether victims had been properly informed. The case began to attract renewed attention, particularly as discussions about accountability and justice gained momentum in broader society. The turning point came in 2019 when federal prosecutors in New York announced new charges against Epstein. He was arrested in July of that year on allegations of sex trafficking involving minors. The arrest marked a dramatic escalation in the case, bringing it back into the global spotlight. This time, the charges were federal, and the scrutiny was intense. News of the arrest spread rapidly around the world. The case became a major international story, with media outlets examining Epstein's life, his connections, and the allegations against him. His network of relationships with powerful individuals became a subject of intense public interest. People began asking how someone accused of such serious crimes had been able to operate for so long without facing greater consequences. As the investigation unfolded, Epstein was held in a federal detention facility in New York. The legal process was expected to be lengthy and complex, with many anticipating that the trial would reveal new details about his activities and associations. For victims and observers alike, the case represented a chance for accountability and transparency. Chapter 4 of Epstein's story is marked by the collision between the private world he had built and the public scrutiny that would ultimately define his legacy. The allegations, investigations, and legal proceedings transformed him from a figure of mystery and wealth into one of the most controversial individuals in modern history. The secrecy that had once protected him now fueled public outrage and demand for answers. By the time of his arrest in 2019, the narrative had shifted dramatically. The story was no longer about a financier with elite connections, but about a criminal case that raised profound questions about power, influence, and justice. The events of this chapter set the stage for the final and most dramatic phase of his life, when the world watched closely to see how the story would end. Jeffrey Epstein's final chapter unfolded under intense global attention, in a way that few criminal cases ever have. By the time he was arrested in July 2019 on federal charges of sex trafficking minors, his name had already become widely associated with controversy and scandal. But this arrest was different from the earlier investigation that had ended in the 2008 plea deal. This time, the charges were federal, the scrutiny was relentless, and the public's interest had grown into a worldwide demand for accountability. When news broke that Epstein had been taken into custody at a New Jersey airport after arriving on a private flight, the story quickly dominated headlines across the world. The image of a man who had spent years surrounded by wealth and privilege now facing serious federal charges created a powerful and dramatic shift in the narrative. The allegations described a pattern of abuse that prosecutors said had taken place over many years and involved multiple victims. The case immediately drew attention not only because of the charges themselves, but because of Epstein's extensive network of powerful and well-known associates. Public interest in the case grew rapidly as media outlets revisited Epstein's history, examining the controversial plea deal from more than a decade earlier and questioning how he had managed to avoid more serious consequences for so long. Journalists and commentators began discussing the broader implications of the case, focusing on issues of power, influence, and the possibility that wealth and connections might have shielded him from accountability in the past. The story resonated deeply with a global audience that was increasingly focused on justice, transparency, and the treatment of victims. After his arrest, Epstein was held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan while awaiting trial. The facility was designed to house federal detainees and was known for its high security conditions. Epstein was denied bail, with prosecutors arguing that he posed a significant flight risk due to his financial resources and access to private aircraft. The decision to keep him in custody meant that the legal proceedings would unfold while he remained behind bars, a stark contrast to the freedom and luxury that had defined his life for decades. In the weeks following his arrest, anticipation grew around the possibility of a trial. Many believed the case could reveal new information about Epstein's activities and potentially shed light on the network of individuals who had interacted with him over the years. Victims' advocates and members of the public expressed hope that the legal process would bring long-awaited accountability. There was a sense that the case represented more than the actions of one individual. It had become a symbol of broader concerns about justice and the influence of wealth and power. Then, in August 2019, the story took a dramatic and unexpected turn. On the morning of August 10th, Epstein was found unresponsive in his jail cell. Authorities later announced that he had died by suicide. The news sent shockwaves around the world. For many, the suddenness of his death raised immediate questions and fueled widespread speculation. The possibility of a trial had created expectations that the case would uncover new details and provide answers. Instead, his death brought the legal proceedings to an abrupt and controversial end. The circumstances surrounding Epstein's death became the subject of intense public scrutiny. Reports about the conditions of his confinement, the procedures followed by the facility, and the events leading up to his death were examined in detail. Investigations were launched to determine whether proper protocols had been followed. The situation generated significant debate, with some people accepting the official findings and others expressing skepticism. The case became a focal point for discussions about the criminal justice system, institutional accountability, and the challenges of managing high-profile detainees. With Epstein's death, the criminal case against him was formally closed, but the broader story did not end. Civil lawsuits and investigations related to his activities continued, as did efforts to understand the full scope of the network that had surrounded him. Victims continued to seek justice through legal channels, and the public conversation about the case remained active. Epstein's legacy quickly became one of the most debated and controversial in modern history. His life story, which had begun in a modest Brooklyn neighborhood, had ended in a federal detention facility under global scrutiny. The contrast between his beginnings and his final days was stark and dramatic. The narrative that emerged from his life was not simply about one individual, but about the complex intersections of wealth, power, secrecy, and justice. In the years since his death, the case has continued to influence public discourse. It has prompted discussions about how legal systems handle cases involving powerful individuals, how victims are supported and heard, and how transparency can be ensured in high-profile investigations. The story has been examined in documentaries, books, and news coverage, each seeking to understand how such events could unfold and what lessons might be drawn from them. The impact of the case has extended beyond the courtroom and into broader cultural conversations. Many people view the Epstein story as a reminder of the importance of accountability and the need for systems that protect vulnerable individuals. Others focus on the unanswered questions and the sense that the full story may never be completely known. The combination of confirmed facts, ongoing investigations, and lingering speculation has ensured that the case remains a topic of public interest. For victims and advocates, the case represents a long and difficult struggle for recognition and justice. Their voices have played a central role in shaping the narrative and ensuring that the focus remains on the harm caused and the need for accountability. Their experiences have helped drive changes in public awareness and have contributed to broader conversations about the treatment of victims of abuse. Looking back, Epstein's life can be seen as a trajectory that moved from obscurity to influence and ultimately to infamy. His final chapter unfolded in a way that captured the attention of the world, raising questions that continue to resonate years later. The story is often viewed as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of transparency and justice. The end of his life did not bring the sense of closure that many had expected. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new phase of investigation and reflection. Governments, journalists, and advocacy groups have continued to examine the circumstances surrounding the case, seeking to understand how the events unfolded and what changes might be necessary to prevent similar situations in the future. In the end, The final chapter of Jeffrey Epstein's story is defined not only by his death but by the lasting impact of the case. It is a story that has reshaped conversations about accountability, justice, and the responsibilities of institutions. It serves as a reminder of how a single case can spark global discussion and inspire calls for reform. The gates that once symbolized the separation between his childhood world and the elite circles he later entered now seem like a metaphor for the divisions that his story exposed. His life began behind the gates of a quiet Brooklyn community and ended behind the walls of a federal detention center, under the scrutiny of the world. Between those 2 points lies a story that continues to provoke reflection, debate, and a search for answers that may never be fully resolved.